Well, today is, of course, Thanksgiving Sunday, that yearly opportunity to pause and give thanks for all of the good things in our lives. And maybe this wonderful picture of Thanksgiving dinner makes you think more of what you wish you had this year instead of what you probably will have. A lot of families are not doing this because of COVID, but I think that many of us would say that even in times of struggle, in times of adversity, that we are blessed in so many ways. But where do the good things come from? Where do the blessings in our lives come from? How we answer that question says a lot about the way that we view the world. Some people think that the reason they have good things is because they work hard for them. They've earned them. They deserve them. You know, why is my life better from my brothers or my next door neighbors or the guy that I see panhandling on St. Paul Street? It's because I've worked hard for what I have and I've made good life choices. You know, I went to school, I studied hard, I was never late for work, I put in the time, I saved, I did without, I made sacrifices, I built a stable home, I paid attention to my diet, I got lots of exercise, I didn't take drugs. I worked hard for what I've got. That's one way of looking at things. And you know, there's usually an element of truth to this, isn't there? I mean, hard work and wise choices very often do lead to good outcomes. You know, I look at what my wife and I have at this stage of our lives, and I can see how decisions we made when we were younger contributed to the life we have now. On the other hand, I look at friends and family who have struggled, and I can point to reckless or irresponsible choices they have made. So that's one view of the world, that people have good things in their lives because they worked for them. They earned them. On the other hand, there's a very different view, which is that it's all just the luck of the draw, blind chance. Some people prosper and other people suffer because of things that have happened to them that they have no control over. You see people who did everything right, and yet disaster befell them. Some argue that the idea that hard work necessarily leads to success is an illusion, because so many of the advantages in our lives have nothing to do with us. You know, starting with things like the fact that we were born in Canada and not in Somalia. And there's truth to this view of the world as well. You know, we have all benefited from being in the right place at the right time. We have all benefited from happy accidents that we did nothing to bring about. And on the other hand, we have all suffered because of things that we have no control over. This is Professor Robert Frank. Robert Frank teaches economics at Cornell University in the United States, and he has written a whole book about this question of whether or not we can claim credit for our successes or whether they are the result more of luck. And he tells two stories. One is that one Saturday he was playing tennis with a friend when Robert, suddenly collapsed on the tennis court. His friend rushed to his side, discovered that he was not breathing and that he had no pulse, and immediately called 911. Now, it turned out that there just happened to be an ambulance only a few minutes away that had just finished responding to a call about a car accident. So it was there like that. And so Robert was rushed to the local hospital, airlifted to a larger hospital, and he recovered. Doctors said that he had the kind of cardiac incident that almost no one survives. If that ambulance had been even a couple of minutes delayed, he would have died. And 2 weeks later, he was back playing tennis. This is Mike Edwards. Mike Edwards was a member of the musical group, the Electric Light Orchestra. One day in 2010, he was driving in rural England when a 1,300-pound hay bale rolled down a hillside and crushed his vehicle, killing him instantly. So Robert Frank asks, what accounts for my miraculous survival, and Mike Edwards' tragic death. Pure chance, nothing else. In one case, good luck. In another case, very bad luck. Robert Frank was interviewed about his book by Stuart Varney of Fox News, and Mr. Varney took great exception to the idea that we cannot always take credit for the good things that come our way. "Professor," he said, "do you not know how insulting this is? I came to America from England with nothing 35 years ago. I've made something of myself with nothing but talent, hard work, and risk-taking. And you're saying this is luck?" "Well, actually, yes," Professor Frank replied. "You may have worked hard, but you were also very lucky." The fact is that Stuart Varney did not come to America with nothing. For starters, he was born in England, and he came to America with a degree from the London School of Economics, one of the most prestigious colleges in the world. And he clearly grew up with the resources and the wherewithal to acquire that degree. He would be an example of someone who was born on third base and thought he'd hit a triple. My guess is that people who take the first view, the hard work view, are more likely to have done well in life, whereas people who attribute what has happened to them more to chance or to luck have not done so well. In one case, it's easy to take credit for the good stuff, and in the other case, it's easy to avoid responsibility for the bad stuff. The thing is, these are not the only two choices. These are not the only two choices. There is a third explanation for the good things in our lives, the things we are likely to name when we're asked what we're thankful for, and that is that life is a gift. And when we see life as a gift, it is easier for us to be truly thankful, even in difficult or painful times. Everyone's life is a mixture of good and bad, of joy and sorrow, of triumph and tragedy. We are each given benefits and blessings that we didn't earn, and things happen to us that we didn't cause, and we each have the opportunity to make the most of the best of what we have. I think COVID-19 is maybe making us a little bit more aware of this. You know, we've been deprived of things that enrich us and bring us joy, like gathering with groups of friends or singing in the choir at church. We see what we've taken for granted more clearly when it is taken from us. But I also hear people say that they have discovered or rediscovered new sources of joy, the pleasures of having time to read, of a less cluttered schedule, of being able to take a walk. COVID may teach us new lessons about what truly matters. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But this third way of looking at our blessings is to see them not as the result of hard work or of blind chance, but as a gift. A few years ago, my son and his wife wanted to buy a house, and it was right when housing prices started to skyrocket. They put in offer after offer on houses, and every one of them was rejected, and they were getting very discouraged. The real estate agent had another client, a single man in his 50s, who was selling a townhouse because he had bought the house that he really wanted. And he said, you know, I'm well established. He'd gone through the same thing, though. He'd put in offers and had them rejected. And he said, you know, like, at this stage in my life, I'm well established. What does somebody do who's just starting to try to get into the housing market? The agent said, well, you know, it's really tough. I've got this wonderful young family, got a couple of little girls. They're trying, but they just can't seem to get their foot in the door. So after listening to her describe my son and his wife, this man said, you know what? I'm not going to list my house on the market. I'm just going to sell it directly to them. And he did so knowing that he probably could have got a lot more if he had listed it. He was a complete stranger, never met my son and daughter-in-law before, but this act of amazing kindness and generosity was a gift that I can tell you has changed their lives. Looking at life not just as an achievement and not just as fate, but as a gift, awakens a sense of gratitude, a sense of humility, and a sense of responsibility to use our gifts to help others. Life might be part work and part luck, but it's very much a gift. And this idea is baked into the Bible, both Old Testament and New. In our reading from Deuteronomy today, God tells the people of Israel that he is leading them to a promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. But God says, when you get there, don't forget how you got there. God says, when you've eaten your fill and have built fine houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold has multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Do not say to yourself, my power and the might of my own hand have gotten me this wealth, but remember the Lord your God. Now, you don't need to be a Christian or a person of faith to see life as a gift. For many people, God doesn't really enter into it. You know, you hear people express gratitude towards those who have made their success possible, and appreciation for the advantages given to them that they did not create. We hear especially women or people of color who have overcome barriers in politics or sports or academics, credit those who went before them, paving the way so that they could succeed. But if you are a person of faith, if you do believe that you are created and cared for by a loving God, there is another and deeper dimension to thankfulness that St. Paul explores in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. So a little background to the reading that John read for us today. What Paul's referring to is that he was taking up a collection from several churches to help the Christians in Jerusalem. Now, the Jerusalem church was the mother church. It's where it all started. But the Jerusalem church had fallen on hard times. They were suffering from persecution and poverty and hardship. Paul asked churches in places like Corinth to collect money that they would then send to Jerusalem, just as we might send money to places devastated by a famine or an earthquake or a war. And it turns out that Paul was a pretty gifted fundraiser. He really knew how to motivate the Corinthians to be generous. And he starts off appealing to their sense of competitiveness. He tells them how much more the Macedonians have given. It's like raising money in St. Catharines by telling people how much they've raised in Fort Erie. You know, you don't want them to beat you, do you? But then Paul moves beyond this to a more profound level by showing how generosity is connected to thankfulness. He says generosity is like sowing seed. The more you sow, the more you reap. The more you plant, the greater the harvest. The more generous you are, the greater the payback. Some have accused Paul of saying, you should give because when you give, you get something back for yourself. We're familiar with that attitude, right? Like a wealthy benefactor makes a huge gift to the local hospital and gets his name on the side of the building. Or, a little closer to home, you make a donation and you know that it's going to lower your income tax. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's not a very spiritual motive for giving. But Paul does not leave it there. He shows how our ability to be generous really starts with the generosity of God. God provides us with good things, and that gives us the opportunity to share those good things. Paul then goes on to say, you will be enriched in every way for your great generosity, which will produce thanksgiving to God. So in other words, when you give, both you and those who receive that gift are filled with a spirit of thanksgiving. But then Paul says something that I just think is quite remarkable. I have to stop and let this sink in every time I read it. Just to remind you, Paul's talking about the money that he wants the Corinthians to give to a struggling church. And in verse 12 of chapter 9, he uses these words to describe that act of giving. He calls it the rendering of this service. The rendering of this service. That's their offering, is the rendering of this service. Which doesn't quite capture the full meaning of what he's saying. It's kind of hard to translate into English. But the Greek has more the sense of an act of worship. It's more like the offering of this worship, is what he's saying. He uses the word liturgia, which is the word used to describe the service that the priests performed in the temple during worship. Liturgia is where we get our English word liturgy, which is another word for worship. So think about this. When we as people of faith give, it's an act of worship. That's the real reason to give. When we are generous, we are actually worshiping a generous God. When we are generous, we are giving back to God what God deserves to have, and that's the meaning of worship. What's more, worship awakens thanksgiving. We become thankful when we worship. When we worship, either in a church service or in acts of love and justice, we open our hearts to God's generosity, overflowing generosity. We open our hearts to the God of divine self-giving, the God who pours out blessings without number. And I just think this is really remarkable. You know, we think that when we are blessed, it makes us thankful, and that's what moves us to worship. But Paul says the reverse is also true, that when we worship, either here or by giving, that actually makes us more thankful. And when we are more thankful, we are readier to bless others. So generosity is not just the result of thankfulness. Generosity can actually be the cause of thanksgiving. Generosity makes us thankful because it is an act of worship. And when we worship, we open ourselves to the presence and power of God. And that makes us more thankful. And that makes us more generous. And that results in a rich harvest of blessings. So I want you to keep that in mind this Thanksgiving. Of course, we can take pride and satisfaction in what we've been able to achieve in life. There's nothing wrong with that. And we can appreciate those who support and care for us when bad things come along. And we can acknowledge that a lot of things happen to us that just look like coincidence or luck. But we can also look at all of life as a gift from a generous God. And when we are generous with what we have been given, that will make us even more thankful. And for Christians, that's how Thanksgiving works. Thanks be to God. Amen.